I clicked it on go.
Okay, verify.
I clicked it
Got
on
some waves,
go.
baby.
Yourself.
I have
Oh,
waves.
The waves.
This is
Wait, yep, there they are.
great.
Okay.
You're maxed out.
Maxed out,
Get your
connected to the top.
microphone maxed
Yep.
out. Okay, we're firing all cylinders. Why don't we go ahead and call your friend Landon and not keep
Yep.
him waiting? We
Yeah.
can discuss.
Do you have a phone number?
Okay, ready.
217.
Hello, this is Nick Custer with Farmers Risk. I'm sorry I missed your call. Please leave a brief message. I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
At the tone, please record your message. When you've finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
Nick, you're going to hear from our lawyer. Okay. Well, while we wait for him to get back to us, Landon can discuss the vision.
Shoot again.
of the
Shoot again.
episode.
Shoot again. Shoot again. He's good.
Okay. What up? Nick, this is your grandmother talking.
Ah,
She has a cold.
I was gonna say it's like the Little Red Riding Hood. What deep voice you have, grandmother?
Yes. Landon, why don't you introduce your friend here?
We welcome Nick Custer to the podcast. Former coworker of mine, one of the greatest salesmen of your ag tech and farmland products from the great city of Effingham, Illinois. He's joining us this evening.
Where are you at now, Nick? Effingham?
I wish I was in God's country. No, I'm in southeast Wisconsin. So.
Oh wow, crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still snowing up there? Is the glaciers receded?
The glaciers have receded. Yeah. I was in Florida last week, and coming back to snow, I was questioning a lot of life decisions. So,
Nick, what was Landon like as a coworker?
oof. Well, obviously you could tell, given that very overly generous intro, he was a good bullshitter. But no, jokes aside, Landon is a great coworker and a great mentor. So glad to have him as a friend as well.
Are you related to his brother Logan or something? You sound strikingly similar.
Are you Logan?
I'm gonna take that as a compliment. Granted, don't tell Logan I said that. So
Yeah. We're sure you're better looking here.
Nick, do you remember what we're talking about tonight?
Yes. My man Nietzsche. Yeah.
My man Nietzsche. Are you able to just say what we're talking about and go right into it, or do you want some background?
I will let you guys shoot with an intro. I mean, I got a few ideas, but
Well, you're doing the intro, Nick. Let's clear.
So
You are
you just
our idea.
whatever
okay.
You say
We aren't really
something
sure what
stupid.
we're talking about yet.
Yeah, we like it when you say stupid things, so then we sound smarter, as Ross implied earlier.
I see. Okay.
What did you know? What did you know about Nietzsche? Were you familiar with the Madman Speech? Something like that.
Before today, no, I was not whatsoever. I knew of the name of Nietzsche. He was probably somebody I should have been aware with or been more knowledgeable of, but just a name that I recognized, but I couldn't put a finger on what he did or contributed to society before today. So did have the opportunity to read the Madman parable, and upon first read, I definitely thought it was kind of your typical, I don't know, kind of like a Catholic Church Renaissance saying, God is dead, shame the world, etc. Something you would hear, of course, similar to what church might say every other Sunday, it seems sometimes. But obviously, then you kind of do some of the backstory of what Nietzsche was about and how he kind of laughed at, mocked, questioned Christianity and the European beliefs. And upon reading The Madman 2 or 3 more times, I had a better understanding, and I had a different viewpoint. I do think it's odd in that he talks about after God is dead in that first or second paragraph, how I think there is some questions that maybe Nietzsche's asking himself as well, is like, what's going to fill the void? And obviously he was writing in the 1800s. And I think to this day, we're also questioning, if God's dead today and what is going to fill the void. And I think we're still looking for that. And there's multiple things that do fill the void, but that's probably not as productive as the Christian faith, and maybe derogatory. I think Nietzsche was saying that philosophy and all these kind of high ideas and thoughts would fill the void of Christianity, but I don't know if that's quite the case today.
I think Nietzsche would be very flattered and encouraged to know the elevated role TikTok has taken in the developed world. So
Dude,
initially,
Candy Crush, way better.
We all have our own gods, Matt. To each his own. Okay, so it sounds like you thought that like Nietzsche was sort of a Christian, sort of complaining about the lack of God at first. Is that the right interpretation of what you said?
Yeah, no, I read it. I read it completely blind.
Yeah, cool. Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
Did you have any interest in philosophy outside prior to this? Is that something you and Landon did? Like, what was your working relationship like? You on a lot of empty country highways in around Illinois, and Landon was talking about how he'd like to turn that field into a golf course.
No. It's we were Zoom software slinging sales reps. We weren't your typical seed dealer that.
We visited
the countryside.
We visited farmers in a Prius once.
That is, yeah. There was a few trips. So, but no, we did not discuss philosophy. Landon, as you and I were talking about this earlier, kind of Abraham Lincoln and some of the people from a few moons ago, this would be part of their education. They would discuss Nietzsche and a few other of the works and be able to quote and kind of have a conversation about it. I think that, maybe God's not dead, but that philosophy and that education in today's society is definitely dead. I doubt many people know about Nietzsche. Granted, maybe we have our different Nietzsche of today to fill the void. We could discuss Game of Thrones and other things and watch a lot more Netflix than ponder these works. I just got to shoot the intro. That easy.
Let's go for it. Let's see what you got, Nick.
And this is, what's the podcast name again? That's pretty bad. The Greatest
Speech Guys.
The Speech Guys. I knew it had speech in the title. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to episode 38 of The Speech Guys. Today we're reviewing Nietzsche on the loser speeches. And I have the absolute pleasure of introducing Landon, Mike, Ross, and Matt. Take it away, guys.
Hey, that wasn't bad. Yeah. We might have you on again one day, Nick.
Oh, don't be.
Hey,
he's got his own podcast.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no.
You have your own podcast?
No, that got buried.
Oh.
It was way in the catacombs, deep on the web. So
only 1% of podcasts have more than 21 episodes. I guess you're in that 99%, huh?
I'm in the 99% grade. Well, you guys made it 38. Was that the hell bent? Like, I'm gonna make it to 22, and then we'll take it up from here.
We actually have probably another 12 unpublished, so we're basically at 50 already. But
oh wow,
it's just
That's for the
they're sort of like
the gold members only.
Yeah, sort of like the songs by John Lennon that were like never recorded. Like, oh, those are the best. Those are the deep cuts. That's basically what those are for us. So awesome. Hey, thanks again, Nick. Let's cue the music.
Michael Schaefer, Ross Johnson, Matt Schultz, and Landon Fry are all here.
It's free.
I'm just gonna say it. I've been thinking it for 10 minutes. I don't want a podcast scared.
Oh yeah.
Ashes. Now I've seen the road.
Pregnancy is a beautiful thing. Pregnancy is a gift.
Oh, there are stories to tell.
enough to
What
get
kind
it.
of paint
done
sticks to
well.
asteroids? Like, if you don't prime your walls.
Afraid some days, but the road will lead us to a better place.
We are called to emerge from that default setting of self-involvement. Okay. Well, hey, that was a great intro by Nick. I think Landon's going to go ahead and lead us into the speech excerpt itself from the book The Gay Science, also known as Joyful Wisdom, a little more amenable to modern ears. So, Landon, why don't you go ahead and read the speech excerpt here?
Yep. Joyful Wisdom, the Madman. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, I seek God, I seek God. As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. Has he got lost? Asked one. Did he lose his way like a child? Asked another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage, immigrated? Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. Whither is God? He cried. I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns. Are we not plunging continually, backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we need to light lanterns in the morning? So we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the gravediggers who are burying God. Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? Gods to decompose? God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. That is the speech. This is the final part of our quad on speeches by losers. Tying it into that theme, I think I did have a hankering for a philosophical work, perhaps a speech within a work or a book as this. So that was what I led my search. I also wanted to find, again, our recap of speeches by losers. We started out losing in war, losing in love, losing in death. And what I was trying to fill was like losing the faith, losing God. And so our loser to critique and analyze tonight is perhaps the madman, or perhaps the loser is Western civilization. For us to...
Or Nietzsche.
Or Nietzsche.
Nietzsche, yeah, maybe.
One of the three.
It sounds like the madman is the one who had faith in the story.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. Or Nietzsche, or this is a analysis of a son of a Lutheran pastor with a lot of education in the late 1800s. One of the great Western philosophers of the last 200 years, fairly controversial. I think controversial because from the Christian side, I did, before I literally before I chose this, I had not read a single line of Nietzsche, but I've heard him referenced a lot. I've heard that if you had to pick a stream of philosophers from Socrates to Plato up until modern day, he would occupy solely, some 50-year stretch of, and then Nietzsche came, and that was, he developed on the canon in this way. So I think he held that place in philosophy. I knew that universally God is dead is coined to him, but I had no idea the context and was quite surprised with the context.
Yeah, as a reminder, I believe it was on the God is dead quote was on the cover of Time magazine in big black background. When was that? 1968, something like that, late 1960s. Yeah, first reactions we have in mind here, but Landon sort of touched on it there. But remember the context for this book. It's like a book of meditations, right? So what we just read, it sort of like has the flavor of a story, but that's pretty much all there is to it. There's like another couple paragraphs after that, but it's this book of meditations, and what is there? Maybe like 400 meditations or something. They're roughly that long, and I was reading through a number of them before tonight, and it almost has this structure, it seems like, where the first maybe 2/3 are sort of undermining the sense of social reliability towards religion. Like, these are the issues where it is not as reliable and optimistic and good as you think. So he sort of breaks those all down. He takes his sledgehammer and knocks out whatever's underneath them. And then the last third, or at very least the last section of it, is this is the solution. The Ubermensch, right? The Superman, which I didn't look this up. Maybe some of you guys saw it, but like, we obviously know Superman is like Superman, the hero. And I wonder like how much of an intentional relationship there was between Nietzsche's Ubermensch and DC Comics Superman. I don't know. We don't talk about it now, but just something fun to visit. Yeah, the Ubermensch, and also the idea of eternal recurrence is another one of the positive sides of that. What to do with God being dead, and also amor fati, or love fate. Right. So that's sort of the general structure of what we're dealing with here. It's not a novel, although it sort of sounded like that from just that bit, but that's what it is.
Mike,
late 1800s. Yep.
1882 maybe. Had you read, and I'm curious about everybody. Had you read any Nietzsche?
Only Bishop Brett McKay's primer from The Art of Manliness.
Did he chant it, or did you?
You gotta chant it, and usually that's a second half thing. We don't read scripture until the second.
But yeah, honestly, that was it. That was the extent of my familiarity with Nietzsche. And the first episode of Smallville on the WB back in 2002, when Lana Lang asked Clark, "Are you man or Superman?" Because he was reading Nietzsche.
So I have a pop culture reference. In The Day After Tomorrow, when they go into the library, or like she was talking with like one of the librarians, and the gal like kind of beat up Jake Gyllenhaal for like not really caring about Nietzsche or like respecting him, and it's like a little back and forth. That movie too. That's like my main reference.
What are some bits of that back and forth? I'm sort of interested in that.
They were throwing books into the fire to burn them.
Yeah.
And he picked up a Nietzsche book, and they're, thinking it's the end of the world. And she's like, "We have to keep him." And he's like, "Why?" Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that now. My dad loves that movie.
I would say I've had slightly more exposure than based on what you guys had said, but to be totally honest, mainly like secondhand stuff. I never like sat down and read Nietzsche, but I feel like just some of his ideas, especially like the Ubermensch and things like that, I feel like I've heard just talks and videos of kind of about him and some of his thoughts and that idea, and how a lot of maybe modern thought or current thought in some ways comes from that type of stuff. So maybe, but I have not, like I said, I've never sat down and read Nietzsche himself to give him his due.
Yeah, we did read. It's hard to say a fair amount, because I would say probably 5 chapters worth of Nietzsche writing in seminary.
Yeah.
We obviously discussed him a decent amount,
yeah.
But in terms of like firsthand Nietzsche reading, I would say that, and probably more secondhand Nietzsche commentary, I guess, is probably what I'm more familiar with. But yeah, we did read at least some firsthand Nietzsche.
So from that reading, or from whatever you can recall, like what did he do, or what did he most contribute to thought, or how did he fit into hey, we got to read Nietzsche in Catholic seminary, and like, here's what you need to grasp about his perspective?
One, I would just say he's a very compelling writer. So it just writes very, just with a lot of gusto. So yeah, I would say, well, certainly worth reading just for that.
It's almost like reading Hemingway. I mean, or it's a lot more simple language than I expected.
Yeah, that much I would say is, Hemingway seems to be very almost like a reporter, whereas Nietzsche has a little more like drive and oomph, like he's really trying to say something. The main thing with, because I mean, we did read this specific, like the Madman parable. I mean, at least from what I remember us focusing on, with Christianity falling away, which again, like, I mean, I've heard this in a number of, Brett McKay, the gospel according to pride.
Make sure you bow your head every time you say his name.
But yeah, I mean, I would say that in some circles it's cliche, in that like the God is dead proclamation isn't a triumphant one. I think I've heard that over and over, but I would say at least there was a time when I first heard it and I was surprised by it, especially that Christian movie, God is Dead or God's Not Dead. Like, yeah, I haven't seen the movie. I saw a brief clip and it just like they totally butchered Nietzsche. Like they just didn't get it. But anyway, but yeah, I think that the main thing they wanted to grasp is in the vacuum of a godless world, like what is there, and Nietzsche would contend that, yeah, I mean, a lot of things do get reduced to power and asserting yourself and viewing that as like that's the new thing. And I think that's an oversimplification. I'm certain that's an oversimplification because there's a lot more to him with, just with him valuing the passions, and to some degree he kind of almost like has a nostalgia for a God-filled world where, maybe more of a pagan God world where, there's these clashes of personalities and people and passions and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But
I'll stop you there. Let's put that on the table for a little later. And the main question I'd summarize there is like the question I have about Nietzsche not having read a lot of his body of work is like, he says he's kind of getting at, he is secular. He says we've killed God as a Western civ. And I'm wondering, just what do you know, or what have we read that, like, does he fill it with anything? What does he like replace it with? So we can talk about that. First, anything to pick apart about the speech, key lines, like how we interpreted it or thought about it. I was surprised how, I mean, the madman is the man who's still like grappling and wants there to be a God, or thinks there should be a God, or is like blaming society for ignoring it. And I thought that was a very generous context for which the quote God is dead appears. I would not have expected it in this manner. It seems like rather than saying like God is dead ! And we killed him like joyously, like we did it, like a French revolutionary, upsetting the establishment, taking over in a Enlightenment manifesto type way. It is more of a like God is dead and we killed him. I don't know. The context seems like a somber statement, like a shoot, look what we just did. Was this the right thing? That was kind of just the way the water was flowing in society, and nobody stopped it.
So to sort of riff on that idea that, okay, so Nietzsche identifies the profound, even though he obviously acknowledges, and not just acknowledges, he affirms and insists that God is not real, and he really like dials into that idea. at least from his perspective, to the idea that everything that you think is like beautiful and ordered in the universe, it's an illusion. It's not actually how it is. So, like, he recognizes this factual inaccuracy of religion, but at the same time, he's expressing these qualms through the person of the madman that it still has, at least with respect to the madman, a very profound, like, psychological necessity, because he recognized that Christian religion required everything that you had, right? And so what other ideal can require everything that you have? Something like the Superman, the ultimate man. But something and I made this note earlier, and actually there's a pretty convenient tie-in to sort of ask you guys and play with is, and Barron brought this up in that beginning of that video between Barron and Peterson, and it was the quote from Saint Irenaeus, and it was the glory of God is man fully alive, or woman fully alive. And because in many ways, like the Übermensch, the Superman, it's sort of just like a play on words. Like, it sounds nice. Like, oh, I no longer believe in God. What else am I going to invest my resolutions towards? Well, it's the Übermensch. Okay, what is the Übermensch? And from what I read, in fairness, what I read was basically it was the actual thing, but it was still condensed. It was something document from Stanford, some class in Stanford had put out. But
just quick,
I was sort of
go. No, keep going.
What was sort of ironic about it was that, at least what I read, one of the things was, like, even though in one section he said that beauty is just an illusion, it's not real, in this next section where it's like the positive, he was like beauty is real. But it's like, how can that be a motivating factor towards building up the foundation of this Übermensch if it's not real? So that was one thing that was sort of like striking to me. And number two, this is sort of like, I don't know how would I articulate this thought, but it's like, and I'd be interested in what Nietzsche would have to say about this. If he's in heaven, I can ask him about it, maybe. But it's the idea that, this Bible, this new... Ross, are you still awake?
I'm looking.
This New Testament, this Old Testament, depending on your font size, is like 1,000 pages long or something, right? It's this copious document that covers thousands of years of history and non-history, right? And simply because of that fact, it has the capacity to engage so many different minds and so many different demographics. And for Nietzsche to say God's not real, what we're going to replace him with are these three tenets, the Übermensch, Amor Fati, and eternal recurrence, I find is profoundly naive relative to his general intelligence in other ways.
Let's break those down. First of all, full context for the Übermensch. I don't know if we've read a couple things about it, but just to clue everyone in that who knows the most about it, because is it referenced in this speech or a different one?
I don't recall it being in this specific excerpt. I think that's something that's better laid out. But
sorry, not the Madman speech. It's in the gay science.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, that could be.
But it is like the ideal man. What further?
But that's the thing.
I would.
It's not very.
Yeah, I mean, he never defines it as like, this is what the Übermensch looks like, and if you don't meet this, and this criteria, you're not. A few things
focus on the individual.
Yeah, definitely focus on the individual. So like not, the societal level things don't really play out there. They play out on, like what you do to your world, not what the world does as a collective. But I mean, I guess just characteristics of the Übermensch, they would be someone who creates, builds, does, establishes something new. There's a certain vitality, energy, risk taking.
Yeah.
There's this sort of willingness to struggle and wrestle and confront things.
There is a good quote. Somebody has it. Like basically, he was saying like, should we become each our own god? And that was like a definition for Übermensch as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that seems reasonable, but I think at least what Nietzsche seemed to be like more interested in or more moved by is just the Dionysian spirituality. I know that he kind of kind of talks about like the Apollo, meaning like order, structure, that sort of thing, and then Dionysus being this sort of like feminine, chaotic, passionate figure.
Yeah.
He seemed to have a preference towards more of that.
More towards order?
No, more towards the passionate, kind of energetic chaos type of thing. But yeah, I mean, I think he would acknowledge there's an interplay between them, and you need both. But yeah, sir, at least from my understanding, seems to have more of a flair for the passionate, that sort of thing.
Ross, thoughts? What's your biggest question?
Thinking about the Übermensch, I feel like I start to picture people. So, and Mike kind of referenced it a little bit with I'll try to tie it in a little bit, but kind of the Bishop Barron and Jordan Peterson discussion. But, and I put it one of the links, but I think in my mind, a way to try to grasp this Übermensch, I liked the image of like modern day superheroes, because it seems to in some ways fit what he's talking about. So, and even when Matt was describing those characteristics, like I was picturing Tony Stark as Iron Man in the Avengers movies. Energetic, passionate, strong, like self-made, didn't really believe in, like he was, more concerned about himself, but like advancing himself. Like, I don't know, just a lot of the characteristics seem to fit pretty well. In some ways, I think when people would start picturing or I guess describing the Übermensch, I think there's a lot of things to be attracted to, if that makes sense. If you some of those characteristics, like those are good things to be. And even if you watch the movies, like there's a lot of characteristics of superheroes that we should emulate. To try to pick at it a little bit though, like as far as Nietzsche and what he was talking about, I think the idea of the Übermensch is somewhat linked to this death of God idea, or his overall worldview, simply because the Übermensch is something I feel like you make yourself, if that makes sense. It's something you strive to become, you do it, you grow into it, and in a way it's kind of the goals of everybody. So that quote, we become our own gods or whatever, seems to fit well with the idea of the Übermensch. And I don't know if we want to get into it now a little bit. I feel like that contrasts a lot with a Christian ideal of, we have to rely on God and his grace and his providence because we can't do it ourselves. So I feel like that is kind of the goal of what your life should look like. It seems to be, it shifts from, total dependence on God to this idea of the Übermensch if God is dead.
There's something that reminds me of actually the Pints with Aquinas podcast I was listening to recently. Who was on? But a person was on as opposed to a cat or dog. And it was pretty striking. Because, okay, so yeah, the Tony Stark and even just these words like, vitality, dynamic. I mean, that sounds exactly how like NPR is introducing the speaker series going on in St. Louis. Hey, check out these dynamic speakers. And in fairness, like those are terms that I would use if I were advertising some speaker. But this gentleman on Matt Fred's show said this, and I think that it really cut to the core of the limitation, the what's the word I'm looking for? The periodization, the lack of endurance. We think of the Superman as this like enduring notion. But here's the sort of thought experiment that proves it's not. Is because the idea of the Superman, if we accept it as the canonized saint of NPR or Silicon Valley, that's very exciting to us, and it's very exciting to middle class Westerners, where it's like, yeah, it sounds like a great life, but go sell that idea to a man or woman who is digging out whatever they need for the day out of a pile of garbage in India or something. It's like that idea is so abstract and nonsense that like, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that would be attractive to some people, but consider a thought experiment. Or propose to them not the Superman, not this passing idea that actually really does not transcend any more than 1880 through ? But rather the idea of a god, someone whom you have some notion of when you look into the stars, would actually became human and maybe not necessarily dug through trash, but at least was a very poor, materially poor individual who, in some way that you can't exactly understand, but you can understand just barely enough at the very least, that he sacrificed himself and died for your own well-being. Like that idea, again, thought experiment, feels like it sticks no matter the time or place compared to the Superman idea, which I think it gets at the idea of the inadequacy of the Superman. And if we say Superman more than 300 times this episode, there's a special gift for all of our paid subscribers.
I was going to say, you've
A lot of people
said it a few times.
maybe the idea of some of these thoughts or the Superman, trying to help our fans out, of the Ubermensch, because it's like, if that's true, there's no need to accept that anything I'm doing is wrong or could be better. Well, maybe not. That's not exactly true. But to make my point better, there's no need to accept that, I guess I'm not a god, or because the Christian idea, right? Like he died for you because because we had sinned, right? So like we had inadequacies, we were broken, we were sinners, whatever you want to put the word on it. But the Ubermensch is like, but with that idea, then it's like that's going to call us to some sort of conversion, to change our lives, to do something different. But I feel like the Ubermensch is like, people don't want to hear, that they're not doing something right. People don't want to hear that they need a savior. They want to hear, well, that's not, some people don't want to hear they want a savior. They just want to hear, do whatever you want to do and do it great and become a god and people will love you. And so I feel like in some ways, I don't know, I think the idea of the Superman is just attractive to people for that.
And I think, beyond just Nietzsche, just like a lot of modern philosophers have kind of done away with any sort of reasonable or like objective epistemology. And like, I think that's a fundamental thing too. Because like, epistemology is like how you know things, like how do you know something's right? And like, I know Nietzsche's kind of more of a perspectivist. I guess you might call it like, it's very similar to relativism, but like, I think he would say some perspectives or some opinions are better than others, which is not really relative. It's like, oh, everyone's the same. But at the same time, how do you know what's better than others? Well, who has the most power? That's kind of seems to be the underlying currency. Who can affect their world the way they want the most, and everything kind of gets reduced to the will, which I know is a central kind of theme there. Which, yeah, you're right, Ross, that like people aren't. There is something attractive to not being subject to anyone else per se, but at the same time, like I don't know, it's just kind of an interesting balance because there are things that are objective you bounce against when you're trying to be the Ubermensch in a let's just say I'm trying to be the Ubermensch in physical therapy, right? And I'm just trying to publish all of the articles and be the speaker at all the conferences and, be the biggest voice in that world. Yeah. I mean that there's certain things I'm going to run up against that like
Chasing
people are going to critique
prestige.
me,
Yeah.
And I need to like confront that, so it's just kind of an interesting acknowledgement of objectivity, but also dismissal of it. At least in like a grand universal sense.
Question. Based on the speech, context, what is said, the madman's the character. What is a good analogy or example? Like, who is the madman of the speech in today's society? Just to, like, relate it back. Is it I probably lean towards like a more noble example than a cynical one. And the reason I said that is like I think you could say the madman is like maybe like a preacher on the street yelling to everyone they're going to hell. I think that would be like a starting example. Is that a corollary to the madman in this text or not? And is there like a
Well, to clarify definitions here, the most fundamental structure of the madman here is that he knows something. Okay, that's the given in this geometry problem. He knows.
We think he knows. We don't know he knows. Nietzsche doesn't know he knows.
It seems like he knows. Well, actually, okay, we don't know if he thinks God exists or not.
Yeah.
But he at least recognizes that society needs to believe that God exists. And that there are these inherent... Okay, nope, we need to keep it general, though, for the sake of the question. He knows
there needs to be something to fill the void.
He recognizes there's something very important question at the heart of society. Yeah. There's different questions, but there's one major question. And he is taking it way more seriously than everyone else is.
Yeah.
Everyone else is just like the herd. It's like, yeah, whatever. That fence was there. Let's take it down, as G.K. Chesterton in The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill says.
Man, we're hitting all the big ones.
All right. I legitimately did not. I was just curious. I was like thinking about the speech and like, how can we relate it? There is probably a perfect example, but I'm curious.
Well, I would.
So, okay. Well, hold on. We're clarifying definition here. He recognizes there's a very important question that the herd is not recognizing as important. That's
when you said that, I was like, oh, there's exactly one answer to this.
I think I would say there's exactly not one answer. And I think I think the beauty of this is it's written very well, and it's written truly like a parable. In that, not like propaganda. Propaganda like only leads you to one conclusion. Propaganda or a parable kind of like allows you to explore a horizon of wisdom. Which is why I think this is. I don't know. I really like this. Because I hear what you're saying in that like there is I think you diluted the centrality of it perfectly. Like there's a person of this sort of mysterious ilk who knows something that most of society isn't willing to or interested to hear. But yeah, I think that I'm curious who you think the one answer is. Just because
we could take this. Yeah. If anybody else has other answers, I think it could be.
Don't podcast scared.
I'm not scared. It's not even interesting.
Say it.
It's not an interesting. I think it's Peterson. I think he is like, he's not, I wouldn't call him like a believer, but like he is out in the town square, YouTube, Twitter, asking a lot of questions that even like Bishop Barron like will get on his podcast and be like, yeah, you kind of like, you did that really well. Like, and I don't know if you're a man of faith or not, but like the mostly like his original lecture series on Genesis, I would say, is like, this is the canon. These are the myths. These are the, key stories that explain human psychology in all interesting aspects of it that he's seen in his work. And like, he was very much out there talking about that. Like, am I more to the secular world than perhaps the Christian world? And like, you could, I think perhaps both sides would agree, like, would call him a madman straight up.
Yeah, I think that's a fair. I'd say that'd be more accurate like 3 or 4 years ago. Just don't need to go on this sidetrack. I feel like he's been a little.
He's more political now because there's a lot more money. There's a lot more money in being political. So rewind, original canon, first 50 podcasts. His biblical series.
I think that's fair.
It's
fair.
It does seem to understand just the complexities of it enough, like Matt said, that like I feel like you probably could look at it, like you could glean a lot from it from different angles at the same time. Like, Peterson seems to fit. Like if you read the speech, it seems to be this guy that has these questions, he's not like yelling at them to believe, but he is asking these questions about God. And so it's not clear really what he thinks. So he's asking them to kind of wake up.
He's yelling at them to like,
at least telling them, or at least recognizing that they're asleep.
Is anyone else like, you
could also say that someone could be seen like the just the growth of technology, the growth of AI, the growth of all these things, and almost maybe not God is dead, but man is dead, and we've killed him.
Ian Malcolm.
And like an Ian Malcolm, maybe an Ian Malcolm type, but maybe someone who's
hold
in
on.
tech.
The question is, we gotta stay with the reality. No fiction.
Right. Sure. But anyway, so
like Elon Musk saying you should have a bunch of kids.
Wait, what?
So like Elon's big thing right now, he's like he talks about like the population decline and like if society has any chance of like hanging on, like if we're gonna do this, like everybody's got to have kids. And it's really weird to hear someone who's very secular to like say that.
Sure.
So
I think Elon could be another figure like this, but I'm just going to paint someone who's I think Elon and Peterson kind of like appeal to a similar crowd. So I'm just trying to think of someone who might appeal to a different crowd. You have the tech person, sees tech is progressing, tech is marching on. There's really nothing we can do to stop it. There's too much money to be made off of it. There's too many battles and conquests to be won, to kind of go back to the abolition of man kind of tournament of tech conquestors. So like this is going to move forward. We just got to just sit back and enjoy the ride and just try to enjoy it as much as you can and just get as much as you can out of this, because there's nothing you can do to stop it, right? Tech's going to take over. Tech's going to take over your life. Nothing's going to be the same. And, whatever, right? So that's a hard truth for people to take in. And that's something that he seems to have, so I feel like the madman, in sort of, I feel like the madman can apply to a lot, which is, I think, which make this.
I think the tech guys, I disagree. I think tech is like looking forward and like keeping the progression of society moving. I don't think tech is the madman in the square being like, wait, are we sure about this? What are we the madman's more looking between the option of backward or forward. I think the madman is looking backward.
So I don't know if the madman's looking backward to see what's happened, what has happened, but I don't think it's hard to tell in this whether he ends up saying, well, this is the way it is. We just have to deal with it.
The
You know what I
second
mean? So
half,
that's what I'm
that's
saying.
fair. The second half is like, yeah.
this is the way it is. We just have to deal with it.
Yeah. Everybody read the second half to get your own context. But yeah. All right, wrapping a bow on this. Anybody else have a thought on who is the modern day madman? Either a specific person to serve as an example, or like a persona to serve as an example.
Yeah, I mean, I think in fairness, it pretty much by definition has to be a conservative person, because the nature of the situation is society is moving zoop, and this one person is moving like zoop.
Conservatives hang on a little to the past. Liberals,
there's no way
push
around
forward.
that.
Like that's essentially what it is.
Yeah. There's a really tidy quote anecdote from the gentleman, the Michael Shermer podcast that I bring up a lot, and he's, the anthem of the conservative or the moderate I suppose, is "We want change. When do we want it? Eventually." Just getting to this idea that change is fine or in certain circumstances, but you move slow through it to understand just the nature of the thing. But
I feel like something Nick brought up I wanted to ask him about, but I didn't want to in the intro, in the 2-minute intro he had, because I feel like it fit well. I didn't understand his comment, like, it sounded like he was talking about this idea of guilt and stuff. That's what we hear every other Sunday. And I didn't catch exactly what he said, but I thought that honestly fit relatively well with this idea that I think Nietzsche would have definitely like abided by, was that kind of their conception of God. And I just looked up the quote. I think it might have been Sartre, but I'm not sure. The person that said, "If God exists, I cannot be free, but I am free, so therefore God does not exist." You guys ever heard that?
Say that again.
I was trying to search. It's actually not a clear quote, but in my mind, I've heard this quote before. But is, "If God exists, I cannot be free. I am free, therefore God does not exist."
Oh, and the best attributable source was Sartre.
I literally typed the quote in. His name popped up. I didn't actually have the quote under his name. That's as far as I got.
Which would make sense. He came right after Nietzsche, so he was French philosopher. So, little in the line of our philosophy degree. Clearly, we don't know because we're all technically educated by state schools. So, we apologize.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like something Sartre would say.
So this idea that God is dead and that Western civilization has abandoned the idea of God, I feel like is somewhat dependent upon how one conceptualizes God and what they think God means when they say God. So the quote again that we were talking about that I think would fit well with Nietzsche, I don't think he said it. "If God exists," and I keep saying quote, I can't find it, so maybe it's my quote. But "If God exists, I cannot be free. I am free, therefore God does not exist." So this idea that kind of this God is our master, we're his slaves, we are bound to do whatever he tells us to do, we are held back from becoming our full potential, or the Übermensch. So by casting this idea of God away from ourselves, it finally allows us to realize our full potential and evolve into the Übermensch. And I don't have that written down anywhere, but that seems to fit well with like how Nietzsche thinks and how he came to this idea of the Übermensch and kind of what society is supposed to be moving towards. So I think that a lot of people probably have a similar thought, like that this idea that, if there are rules I must follow, I'm not free. So they kind of, because they think that way, they fit, this seems to resonate well with them. So if you simply think of it in those terms, Nietzsche would be correct. If you think of it as this idea of God is holding me back because he is right, he's demanding these things of me, he's holding me back. So if that is who God is, then Nietzsche's absolutely right. We would need to move away from this concept of God to, thrive, to excel, blah, blah, blah. I think and I'm stealing this from Bishop Barron, but what the response would be, at least from the Catholic or Christian perspective, would be that's not actually who we believe God is, though. So Barron really, he likes to talk about the idea of the burning bush in the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus. So this idea that the bush was on fire, but it was not consumed. And I think most people probably read over that and just, okay, this bush is on fire, but it's still there. And he draws all kinds of stuff out of it that really tells us a lot about who God actually is, because he is not in direct competition with us. So by, following his will, uniting ourselves to him, listening to God, whatever, however you want to word it, is actually it not at all holding us back from becoming who we're supposed to be. It actually elevates us to something higher. So that's the quote Mike mentioned earlier from St. Irenaeus, the glory of God is man fully alive. So to me, that is the response to this idea of God is dead, we're held back, we're enslaved, we need to become Übermenschens, or the Übermensch. The idea is, well, actually, this St. Irenaeus quote from whenever St. Irenaeus lived, 250, I don't know. So I just think that that's kind of an interesting, I'm not saying that's the only thing that led Nietzsche to this belief, but I feel like a lot of people, even that probably claim to, or even that are Christian or Catholic or whatever, probably have this idea of this concept of God. And that's interesting that that's not, who we actually believe he is.
Yeah. But so I'm glad we're revisiting the glory of God idea, because we can all, and I think that I think I've said this before, but I get to a significant extent it applies to you guys, a tremendous quantity of fuel for the way in which I decide to continue to live my life, which is an attempt at some modest expression of virtue and moral behavior, is based upon those very specific individuals who really it's obviously such a cliche, but who walked the walk, walked the talk, but not in just this, but in this very radical way, right? And just calling it like it is, but who practice NFP, that's such a radical thing, and who are in
Who practice what?
NFP, natural family planning, and who it's a discipline to go to church every Sunday with your family, even when your kids are a pain in the ass, and crawling all over you like a playground and stuff like that,
or running away
and
from
also
you.
just
That's the worst.
Hey, get away from that Lutheran church. You're not Lutheran. Come back here. Or just the way that they ask you questions. It's a subtle example, but it sort of gets my point. But just the other day, I was talking with my buddy Steven, Ross's best friend, who he doesn't know anymore. But yeah, we were talking on the phone, just catching up, shooting the breeze. And Steven asked me, how did he exactly phrase it? He said, any big achievements lately on the climbing wall, or something like that. But the way that he asked it was Steven doesn't climb, right? So it's not like he's climbing, I'm climbing, or keeping up. It was just that this is something I care about, and I'm going to get excited about when I talk about it. So I'm going to ask you a question in the right way that's open-ended and within the scope of my knowledge of the thing, which is very limited, but gives you the opportunity to come alive. Those kind, and you guys do this too, but those kinds of questions that are conscientious, that give the other person the opportunity to come alive. Anyway, that basket of things which I just acknowledged, like these are the things which is man and woman like fully alive that we've like all witnessed, and we're like willing to live in, I won't say radical ways. We can all do better. You guys are assholes sometimes, but you know, fairly radical, right? Just in this very statistical sense of the word. Like that, but that's the challenge, because like how many of those people, it's like, of course, I don't want to sound prideful, like, oh, hey, there's not many of us go around, you know. I guess maybe to put a fine point on it, which I did write in the comments, is like a lot of Nietzsche's critiques of religion or Christianity are legitimate critiques, because that you're doing Christianity the bad way, right? Which unfortunately is a lot of people. Yeah.
To be honest, I don't know if Nietzsche would say, I think Nietzsche would say God is dead not because Christians did Christianity poorly. God is dead because we have just discovered through like rationalism and the scientific method and all these other things that like all these things that we used to attribute to God are no longer attributable to God.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I would agree.
I don't think he's saying
to rebut that.
I mean, he definitely would critique Christians, like in a lot of ways, like, because the slave I know he talks about the slave morality with Christianity, and how a lot of people just kind of hide behind this, like, oh, well, maybe, you know, things will be better once we're in heaven, so I'm just not going to worry about anything now and just be whatever. And like, yeah, I mean, he did make that critique as well, but I feel like that was kind of after the fact. Like, given the circumstances that God doesn't exist, like, this is actually what's going on, you know. But
I think that you will often hear that first out of the mouth of someone who rebuts Christianity. Is like,
yeah,
Christians are terrible, therefore whatever. Or some version of that, like, well, they don't set a good example, or
yeah, a lot of people say that,
people
but I
don't
think Nietzsche uses that as like a
correct. And I think that is some form of an excuse, but what Nietzsche is doing is he's pointing to the whole body of work of progressive enlightenment, and I think the people who would try to understand non-Christian worldviews or beliefs would then turn to Nietzsche for a certain type of canon and path forward, or you know, he said it best for why the Enlightenment separating from Christianity was like the way to go, but it is not the reason for the fork in the road in the first place.
It's like dying with COVID versus dying of COVID.
Yeah, I think the fork in the road in the first place, and maybe you guys disagree, is like, man, it is like, oh, Christians don't do it well. What even is this? And then it leads to Nietzschean ideas.
I don't know. I think that I'll try to, maybe I'll tie this well, maybe not. We'll see. This idea of when the madman says, you don't even know it yet, and I don't have the exact quote. Yeah, like the people aren't even aware of it. I think that seems to be more, I don't know what's going on, but like, I could see that being more like this idea that people aren't really aware what's going on. They don't give enough time to some of the questions, and then they hear something that sounds good. And Nietzsche's is, you can do what you want to do, you know, you can be who you want to be. And all these, I feel like from that, we have all these, I don't know your truth, you're okay the way you are, all of these things. That's like, those aren't necessarily in alignment with the Christian perspective. And if you don't hear a good Christian answer to it, you don't really get it, which kind of goes back to the whole of the concept of God thing we talked about earlier.
I also don't think Nietzsche's that soft and be who you want to be. I feel like he would be like, no, stop being a freaking loser and just assert your will on the world, you know?
But like your will being like what you want it to like, but like even the idea like assert your will on the world, but like it's still your will. Like you get to decide what it is. So maybe a harder version,
yeah,
but the same idea that like you get to pick. You know, nobody can tell you you're wrong. And I feel like to a rebellious 16-year-old, that's kind of an attractive thought.
That's true.
You know what I mean?
Right. He'd be a far right conservative if he was here today.
That's an interesting
I could see that. Yeah. I gotta get back.
He'd be like
I feel like he'd be like Milo Yiannopoulos or something.
Right, yeah, just like
kind of
whatever Milo is, but that is that.
But also like do a bunch of drugs. Who cares? You know. Yeah.
From Nietzsche to Milo, this is the speech, guys.
I do think what's interesting, like we've talked a lot about, this, I don't know. I do think it's an interesting thought, this idea of this concept of God and how you conceptualize God might affect which side you fall on, if you will. And, we would say if you had the correct understanding, you maybe wouldn't fall into some of these thoughts. People probably argue back, but without really anybody to argue the other side well, I don't know how well that's going to go. But, meaning no one here. I'm not saying no one can actually argue things well from the other side, but I do think this kind of the idea of the void and what fills the void is an interesting question we haven't really discussed very much yet.
What fills the gap?
Yeah, I mean, what does fill the gap? That's the question, I guess. I'm going to give a really broad answer first. I think ideology fills the gap.
We asked for one answer.
Well, I'm going to say two answers: ideology and convenience. I think those two things.
Hold on, to explain it. Fills the gap of what? Fills. So we're talking about
if God
filling
is
the
dead,
gap. If God is dead,
right? So there's this. I mean, the Madman alludes to like what, how shall we comfort ourselves? Murder of all murder. What do we do now? What sacred game shall we invent? All this.
Yeah.
What do we do?
So your answer is
space. Ideology, and convenience.
Whatever passions you have, convenience certainly. I do when I think about, just to add a little more flavor, I don't think we can really even begin to comprehend the role of quote unquote God and perhaps more religion in like 1860s Germany. Like, I just don't. I think there's an absolutely so much filling the gap that, like, to actually understand what it'd be like to basically be a peasant for a church within 2 miles of you that like was your entire life, with all kinds of rhythms and routines, and like probably all that you knew for like readings or entertainment was the Bible. Could you imagine if the only thing you could reference or tell jokes about or talk with your friends was the Bible? Like I can't even fathom that. Like, we have so much entertainment and source material for everything that is not the Bible, and I think that it was the exact opposite at the time that he wrote the Madman.
Kind of a interesting thought. There was, I guess, like a Russian composer who was asked, like, how do we like restore, like, I guess you, like, as a composer, more of like a religious setting, like, how do we restore tradition and like this rich cultural, vibe or whatever to Christianity? And his answer was, well, first you go to the countryside and you live there for like 300 years, and like maybe something will come out of it. Like, just like whatever rhythms of life emerge from that, like maybe something like will emerge, which I think is a really irritating answer, but also I think fairly, not helpful exactly, but at the same time, I think gets to a certain idea that, if God is dead, it's not exactly an easy task to just bring about what God is. I know Ross kind of referenced that question briefly earlier, and how do we? So I guess how do we fill the gap? Certainly, society is very quick to grasp at all of the things that the world has always grasped at: prestige, money, power, what have you. But I feel like, I don't know. It's just such an odd thing to consider. And I guess maybe a touch more about Nietzsche. I mean, one of the books he wrote was Beyond Good and Evil. That's the title. So if you're talking about good and evil are no longer your benchmarks. So what is there? It's, basically I referenced it earlier, but the will, the will supplants it. So I don't know. I don't know if maybe that was dove off a little too deep, but not connected enough. But yeah, I feel like there's just so many weird things you can choose, but.
Well, in fairness to the 300-year solution composer, there is a certain amount of intelligibility to that, because as we sort of insinuated earlier, it's Nietzsche and his ideas, they didn't just magically crop up, right? They cropped up through very particular sets of events. I mean, also through some freedom of his own agency, but yeah, through sequences of events, right, that took place over hundreds of years. So my only critique of that idea, and actually this I've heard on Matt Fradd's show, which I don't wholly agree with, but it gets at this idea of I guess you would say separatism, where it's I've heard it expressed this way, where it's society. I really don't love that word, but is what it is. Society has gone so far astray that you can no longer even evangelize the culture. You just form your own communities and go from there. And I think, let's see, I want to make sure I don't ramble here, because we're thinking of what fills that vacuum. Yeah, we're starting to fill that vacuum. Okay, I'm just going to cut that thought off. The 300 years thing. Okay, so that sort of gives validity to that idea. So Matt said ideology and convenience. Yeah. How would you guys define ideology? Why did you choose that word?
I guess, ideology is, if I were to define it, or I guess the best definition I've heard recently is, I didn't come up with this myself. I can't attribute it to one person. I guess I've just heard it thrown around. So sorry to whoever I'm stealing this from. But it's a simplified understanding of the universe, right? Where the more simplified something is, the more ideological it is, I guess, might be one way to think about it. So if this were the case, the world would be fixed, or the problems of the world would be solved, right? So if all the wealth was distributed equally, problems of the world would be solved, right? Or if everyone just pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, the problems of the world would be solved. So those would be two opposite sort of ideologies. So I feel I think that's the best definition of what makes an ideology an ideology. Whereas someone that something that has a nuanced understanding of there are no simple solutions. There are no, I feel like that's less ideological. But ideologies are still very moving, compelling things, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that ideology, just working with the root words, I mean, it's simply a collection of ideas, right? And so, I mean, Christianity, by definition, then can be an ideology. Like, it's that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true or not true. I mean, it is a collection of ideas. It does operate that way.
Yeah, it's like a commitment
but
to one plane of thinking.
Yeah, but there is significance to the idea where it's like Christianity is set apart because it is a collection of ideas, but it all also is profoundly tethered to the existence of a particular individual in history, right? And so then there's all these like little off branches of a very diverse collection of claims and investments based upon that thing, and also just the whole history of the Jewish people before that, right? There's a little bit more like texture to that whole ideology, which makes it interesting and worthy of consideration. Okay, but to Matt's point, yeah, why does ideology itself today like more of a thing? Because it is ideas. Like, we love ideas. That's why there's a bajillion podcasts, the Speech Guys among them, today, or a bajillion things on social media. It's all it is ideas. Just pick your ideas. We are the perfect democracy now where everyone's idea is perfectly equal. Just choose the one that matches your skin color or whatever demographic, and that is the one for you, right? Yeah, disregard any other sort of thing that people might have said tether themselves to before, like philosophy or religion. Like philosophy, like it attempts to be academically rigorous, right? And you can debate the rigors of this or that philosophy, but that's why I'd say that's more like in the past. But then the convenience, like Matt was saying, like that is the marriage. That's the liturgy of the modern world, where it's like, yeah, this is my belief system, my ideology. And now when I go liturgize, when I go live my daily life, what is going to help me believe that more, which is not going to threaten the integrity of that ideology, is to make sure that my life is convenient as possible. So, yeah, basically the same answer as Matt, but just, yeah, filling them out a little bit. But ideology, convenience, seems right.
Like when you said when you asked the question, like what fills the void, my first thought was politics, just thinking of people today. But I kind of wanted to like, I think what people use to fill the void, and I use the word in my head, causes. And I think it's similar to some of what you guys were saying, but it's like people will attach themselves to some cause. And not that the cause is even bad, right? Like racism or climate change or fill in the blank. Like, and they will just attach themselves to it so passionately that like that is where they're drawing their meaning from and their purpose from in life. Right? It kind of makes me think a little bit of like the St. Augustine quote, like, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. It's like people can bounce around from ideas, but they're always somewhat unsatisfying to like those really deep desires or questions of like, what's the meaning of my life? And it seems difficult to replace something that says like Christianity is unique and that it's like, it's concrete enough that it's like, yeah, this one person lived in this place, in this time, name the year, name the towns, but it's also as big as it gives purpose and meaning to the life of every individual for all eternity. Like it just like, it seems difficult to replace something like that to fill the void. And it seems like no matter how hard you try, you're just going to kind of be grasping at something.
So how do we fill that void? How do we resuscitate God who is dead, we might say? Landon, do you have a response to the other question?
Yeah, I think I let off with a little bit of a response, but also think that I think that what he predicted, I could read another quote of what he predicted, but it would kind of get us into World War II and, Hitler and the kids of Nietzsche.
This is a 7-part episode.
The next generation beyond Nietzsche in Germany. We know what happened there. All I'm saying. That's all.
I had questions on that, but
yeah, I think we'll just leave that be. I'll just clarify the possible road you could go down there, but all the things we've grappled with, Nietzsche has kids, the generation after is Germany, World War II. So we'll stop there. I think.
Okay, I will ask. I ask one question that I hinted at. There is it's not clear to me how religious was Hitler.
Totally. I think you would have to read Mein Kampf, which is my struggle, to understand that. I freakishly fear that I don't know that could be an exercise for one someday. I think some people would say he used the churches as a mechanism and they would mark up Hitler's evils to Christianity's evils. I think the left would say that, the right would say he was an atheist and look at all the bad things atheists do. They'd both claim. And I think there was support because he made sure that the churches that did stick around preached his gospel, and the ones who would not preach his gospel, he off. So it's the churches were still around. They claimed to be Christian, but they were propagandists. So both sides could claim their own. I would say just what have we filled the void with? I think much of Nietzsche's predictions, we've filled the void with ourselves. We are so perhaps self-absorbed. Maybe we put it in the form of our own political ideologies, our identities, but we are, it's just all about the individual and us, and we have probably made ourselves gods. You were about to say, Mike, to bring us home, what is it?
We've identified some things that might fill that void currently, but as it is, God is dead now for 170 years, 60 years. So how do we bring him back to life? Is it possible? Is that our final bell question?
Boom. Yes, it is.
Yes, 15. One more round. There's no stopping this now. This is our round. Won't stop it now. You start, we don't stop. All your strength, all your power, all your love, everything you've got. This is all light here. You are young.
Okay, how do we resuscitate God?
I think I was going to start with the funny way, but that's too cool. I think just reestablishing the right concept of who God is would go a long way. So, kind of reference everything I said earlier, but just understanding who he is, so that he's not in competition with us, all these things seem to make everything about Christianity then make more sense and make the arguments against it, at least from the perspective that I mentioned earlier about how we have to be made free. They don't seem as attractive anymore. I think that, to get my hip answer in, I think there is a lot to be said. Reading The Lord of the Rings, I think would be helpful. And I do that. I say that in the stance of here, to quote or to get extra points from 3 episodes ago, providence and grace. This idea of providence and grace is very prevalent in The Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
And as opposed to Marvel movies, where it's the complete opposite. It's these Ubermensch heroes that just keep being stronger and faster and bigger and more powerful, and then they beat the bad guy. And then they assert their will, and it's awesome. And if I could just be more like him, I don't know, just that idea. as opposed to Lord of the Rings, where these ideas like providence and grace and the most powerful figures aren't the ones that do all the work because they recognize they can't, like, it's not up to them. It's not up to power and asserting your will. It's up to these other factors to really restore Middle Earth, or to save Middle Earth. So I think that just reading that and having the proper understanding of that, like, we do need seeing providence and understanding our need for grace, I think would come a lot more from reading the Lord of the Rings as opposed to watching the Avengers. And some of that I stole from Bishop Barron, but some of it I put my own points on.
Like, what does God's CPR look like? Is it rescue breaths? Is it chest compressions?
Rescue breaths are out, Matt.
Oh.
Oh.
If you have a mask, of course, so you don't catch COVID.
30 and 2, baby. For adults. You drink that whiskey, Mike.
I'll fill in. I got a short one. I think it just, like, as it relates to what we talked about, I think understanding the arc of the progress of man, perhaps as man relates to his position with God, but understanding it in the context to how we got here to our society today and the triumphs or pitfalls, whatever. I think it is important that that we know our history and know that, like, we perhaps stem from a society, whether it be academia or just like the cultural trickle of forces that we can't even point to or put a pin on, just like the madman in the story. It's like he's out in the town square, like, what happened? Like, I fear this. Is this going on? And people are looking at him like, what are you talking about? I feel like even I like asked my wife, like, oh, we're talking about Frederick Nietzsche tonight. And she's like, who is that? Or like, I don't think I've heard of him. It's like, we don't even really know all of the forces and thinking and ideas and perhaps the water that we're swimming in that led to conscious thought or progress or whatever. And I think that just the standard, like, classically liberal education of philosophers as they relate to how they interpreted religion, which you were either Catholic or a great Protestant thinker or a atheistic expat. Like, Nietzsche's father was a Lutheran pastor, so he was just like, he knew all of the tradition, he branched off from it, so everything has typically been in response to the word of God, and we lost that like one generation ago, probably, and we're like swimming without a paddle, and just being able to cite your sources back to, all right, what are you building off of? I think it's important. So there's no new ideas under the sun, and God was the sun up until probably a generation ago for pretty much everything. But I don't think he is anymore. I think you could go through all of school now as a Gen Z or what have you and not get really that close to even Nietzsche, who was a questioner 140 years ago.
I think my answer is actually stealing a line from Bishop Barron article that he wrote on the Avengers that Ross was referencing. The idea to evangelize the imagination. It feels it feels like low-hanging fruit in a sense. And what I mean by that, and this does connect in many ways that I didn't get to bring up, but I'd made in the notes with Nietzsche. So imagining the world in like 1880, or even just like United States Catholicism in like 1955 or something, where it's like man, the church just runs everything. Like, good stuff happening, really, really bad stuff happening, but it had power and influence. Like, you could have those 20 students in your classroom, and you could just say whatever you felt like you needed to say, and that dissenter among them would not have a voice. Like, they would just be like smashed and smothered. All right. And so it reminds me of that quote of, what is it? Good times create weak men, and weak men create bad times, and bad times create great men. Something like that, where that moment was in a sense, a good time. To put it very simply, politically speaking, it was a good time. Yeah, I don't want to yeah. And so you have these individuals in authority, teachers, clergy. Obviously, some of them as great as they've ever been, right? But some of them, who said like, man, that is an admirable position, being an important position, being clergy or teacher at a Catholic high school or Catholic school. Like, you were admired, you were important, and they go in there and they don't have imagination. They go in there and they spew whatever they feel like they're supposed to spew, and they're feeding the machine. And obviously, then, as we said, it's good times create weak men. Those students were made weak because their imaginations were not fed. Christ was not part of their imagination. Christ was just political science or something like that. And of course, the people who were imagining were those dissenters, the ones who were thinking, well, what about this? What about this? And that's why the stories became, that's why, man, the 10 Commandments, I showed that to my class when I was teaching, and I've rewatched this, and it's like, that's such a fun film. And it's like, regardless of how historically accurate it is, it's still rich with imagination. Like, it makes you feel alive, right? And I think credit to Bishop Barron, A Word on Fire, and other great films like that I referenced a lot, or Calvary, or that Padre Pio one, Shia LaBeouf in, looks pretty good. I think that came out. I don't know. It seems like it was a pretty obscure movie or something. But the point is, they're rich in they're meshing the truth and the dogma with imagination. And I think that is the reintegration of the breath compressions with a CPR.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, kind of piggybacking on that. I think story and imagination are big, especially like wonder, awe, fairy tales, that sort of stuff. Just kind of feeding the moral imagination of kids in a way that's, I don't know, I guess just authentic, but also a little like scary, if you think about some fairy tales.
Is there like a trilogy of books
might
recommend?
Oh yeah, no, I think that's for sure part of it. But I guess
the Golden Compass, right?
But restoring the transcendent might be like the kind of simplified version of that. So I think that's one. I think perhaps on the other side, just build new symbols or new just something needs to point people. And if the transcendent, if the 10 Commandments movie just doesn't resonate with people, I mean, it's at some point you need to
that's a great film, Matt.
Figure out what the heck does. It does. No, I
you
agree.
Just show it to him again.
But yeah, I guess I just pay attention. Yeah, I guess you just need to pay attention to what the new symbols are, and what the new rituals are, and kind of similar to how Christianity took these pagan festivals and pivoted them, to point towards Christ. It's like, all right, well, there's new things that are kind of the pagan festivals of our day. How do we pivot them?
Yeah, nice. Well, man, new speech series coming up in a few weeks. We got some ideas on our speech series outline. Don't know what we'll land on, but I'm sure it's going to be great. Ross is going to be leading off the charge. Fantastic. Landon, what are you smiling about?
So Ross, well, I'm just thinking
My
of
job is to
baseball.
get a
It's like-
single, and then somebody's got to move me over to second. This isn't. I'm old school.
Yeah, grounder.
I don't
Yeah.
have a high launch angle. I
So-
just hit a line drive
Mike
up the
just
middle.
bunts
Get on
because he
first
can't
base.
do anything else.
Matt's either striking out or hitting a grand.
I'm the number 3 hitter,
Yeah.
baby.
I think that means that
Yeah.
that I'm batting fourth. I'm typically on steroids. I can like get it. I just swing for the home run, but like I can't field. I have no field position.
Or I'm actually a really good pitcher who's also a really good hitter. Like, hey, yeah, toss him in on second. Toss him in second batter. I'm like a Randy. What's that tall pitcher's name? Randy
Johnson.
Randy Johnson?
He wasn't a
Randy
good hitter.
Johnson.
He's pitched to the American League. He never hit.
Yeah, but he's a
Never.
good pitcher. I'm
Like
an
pitch-
improvement
pitches for
on
the
him. I can hit too. Cool. Well, hey, it's been great. Thanks for drinking.
And thinking.
With us.
Hear the
Good,
music.
you're good.
Landon, you can speak. No, you say be safe out there.
Be safe out there.
Hey, cue the music. Let's go.
Dead ends come and go. Look toward the horizon. Up ahead you'll find a peace of mind, relief from the trying. I have burned a bridge, wrecked in a ditch, had to ask forgiveness. Dead ends come and go. Look toward the horizon. Oh, there are stories to tell. The times we grew and the times we fell. Oh, I've been afraid some days, but the